just another few seconds to let the breakout rooms return, and we'll be ready to get started this morning. 30 seconds.
If you don't have a sutra book, we have pages with the day of reflection. We're going to do a day of reflection, recite the day of reflection this morning, which is the precepts, essentially, and then I give a little talk about it.
Okay. Yeah, you can have a seat there. I was just going to say that again and do the formal introduction a little bit. I think we have one more breakout room that's good. Here they come. Welcome back. Good morning, Sarah. I see you. Teisho Ping's back. All right. Welcome back, everyone. We're passing out sutra books here in the Zendo. Those of you may want to go to our website and click the link under liturgy to find our sutra book to join along with us. Today, our abbot and co-founder, Roshi Robert Althouse, will be guiding us through a day of reflection where we will be reciting the Zen Peacemaker's liturgy entitled The Day of Reflection. And Roshi will tell us more about it here. So go ahead and find that and come join us. Thank you, Roshi.
Can you all hear me online?
Yeah.
Okay. So you should be able, if you go on our website to Sunday Morning Zen page, you'll see a link there to the day of reflection. And what we're going to do this morning, in the Zen tradition, this is known as Fusatsu, and it's but in this way of this form of in the Zen Peacemaker section, here to
It's a little staticky. You're cutting in and out. Can't really hear Roshi.
Your shirt is moving. She said it sounds a little scary.
So let me just get a big microphone. Can you hear me?
Oh, much better.
Can you still hear me? Okay. So what we are doing here is the idea is that we're all taking these precepts and we're just going to read them through together, and it starts with I, and then you say your name. Now recite the Gath of Atonement, and we'll just go through these. And then what you're doing, you should be careful what you recite, because what we're reciting here is we're trying to make our best commitment to keep these precepts just for one day, which would be really something if we could do that. And then at the end of the day, in your respective homes, you're going to, again, you can go to our website and find this. You're going to recite, dedicating the merit of having done this practice for one day, and you're going to recite that in your own home. And I like the feeling of this very much because we're doing this in a way that allows this ritual to be part of our daily lives, and something that some of you are doing here at the Zen Center, some of you are doing online, but it carries through the whole day, and you finish the ritual in your own home, which I think is a lovely way of doing this practice, so that you get the temple isn't just here at the Zen Center. Your home is the temple. Your life is the temple. The world is the temple. Yeah? That's very much a Zen peacemaker kind of feeling, is that temple is the world.
Robert,
Yeah,
okay, can you move the mic closer if you can?
yeah. How's this?
Oh, better, thank you.
Okay.
Yeah. And can the folks on Zoom mute so that Roshi stays in the main screen, please?
The ZLMC mic is muted.
Can you hear me now? All right, here we go. And you should all have a sheet or the sutra book so we can all read it together. Hmm? On page 39 of the sutra book, yeah. Day of reflection. I, Joshin, now recite the Gatha of Atonement. All karma ever committed by me since of old, due to my beginningless greed, hatred, and delusion, born of my actions, speech, and thought, now I atone for it all. All karma ever committed by me since of old, due to my beginningless greed, hatred, and delusion, born of my actions, speech, and thought, now I atone for it all. All karma ever committed by me since of old, due to my beginningless greed, hatred, and delusion, born of my actions, speech, and thought, now I atone for it all. Now, being mindful of my actions, speech, and thought, I commit myself to observing this day of reflection with the following practice of taking refuge in the three treasures. I, Joshin, take refuge in the Buddha, the oneness of life. I take refuge in the Dharma, the diversity of life. I take refuge in the Sangha, the interdependence of Buddha and Dharma. I, Joshin, take refuge in the Buddha, the oneness of life. I take refuge in the Dharma, the diversity of life. I take refuge in the Sangha, the interdependence of Buddha and Dharma. I, Joshin, take refuge in the Buddha, the oneness of life. I take refuge in the Dharma, the diversity of life. I take refuge in the Sangha, the interdependence of Buddha and Dharma. I commit myself to observing this day of reflection with the following practice of the three tenets of a Zen peacemaker. I, Joshin, for the coming day, commit to not knowing by giving up fixed ideas about myself and the universe. I commit to bearing witness to the joy and suffering of the universe. I commit to taking action that arises from not knowing and bearing witness. As Zen peacemakers throughout all space and time have practiced the following 10 precepts, so will I, Joshin, observe these practices. I will recognize that I am not separate from all that is. This is the practice of non-killing. I will not lead a harmful life, nor encourage others to do so. I will live in harmony with all life and the environment that sustains it. I will be satisfied with what I have. This is the practice of not stealing. I will not take anything not given and not encourage others to steal. I will freely give, ask for, and accept what is needed. I will meet. This is the practice of chaste conduct. I will not create conditions for others to be unchaste. I will give and accept love and friendship without clinging. I will listen and speak from the heart. This is the practice of non-lying. I will not create conditions for others to lie. I will see and act in accordance with what is. I will cultivate a mind that sees clearly. This is the practice of not being deluded. I will not encourage others to be deluded. I will embrace all experience directly. I will bear witness to the offering of each moment. This is the practice of not talking about others' errors and faults. I will not encourage others to talk about others' errors and faults. I will acknowledge responsibility for everything in my life. I will speak what I perceive to be the truth. This is the practice of not elevating myself and blaming others. I will not encourage. I will give my best effort and accept the results. I will use all the ingredients of my life. This is the practice of not being stingy. I will not foster a mind of poverty in myself or others. I will bear witness to emotions that arise. This is the practice of not holding on to anger. I will not create conditions for others to be angry. I will not harbor resentment, rage, or revenge. I will practice with emotions. I will honor my life as a Zen peacemaker. This is the practice of not disparaging the three treasures. I will not create conditions for others to disparage the three treasures. I will recognize myself and others as manifestations of Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. In renewing the 10 precepts, I, Joshin, now extend these into the sphere of the 4 commitments. I commit to a reverence for all life, a sustainable and ethical economy, equal rights for all, and stewardship of the earth. Now, with all Zen peacemakers throughout all space and time, I, Joshin, renew the Bodhisattva vow to serve all beings. I'm not sure where to begin. We just did something together. You know, it's hard to talk about religion these days because it has such a bad taste in our mouths. It has so much baggage, and we see so many bad examples of it that it's hard to consider the possibility that we could be on a spiritual path that is deeply religious and genuine. The style of our Zen Center is certainly secular. There's no doubt about that. I'm very comfortable with that. I think many of you are too. But when I consider all that I have received as a lineage holder in this Zen tradition through my teachers, I can't avoid the religion. I can't avoid the spiritual depth of the Zen Buddhist tradition, which I have received. And it's not that there's anything the matter with humanistic psychology, or we work with this all the time. But the deeper transformation in life, my experience is that it comes through a deep religious, I don't want to use the word conversion because that's already, see, it's hard to talk about religion. But a deep change of perspective that is transformational and transcendent. We just recited all these beautiful values that we intend to keep today. But this is not a self-improvement project. That's not what we're doing here. This was a religious act that we just did together. I don't know how you can avoid it. To take refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha is a religious, it's an act of faith, an act of imagination, an act of faith in something larger than my own agenda, my own contrivances. What I contrive is so small. And without some kind of religious, spiritual perspective, I think we more or less end up with some kind of self-improvement project. And I don't think that's going to take us where we want to go. It's just not going to do it. So, I'm going to speak about religion today without apology, because most of the time I don't. But here today, we just did something religious together, and I think we should honor it and appreciate what we did. You start out what we did today, with this Goth of Atonement. A lot of people don't like this Goth of Atonement. They kind of cringe when they have to chant it. And it's even stronger in another version. We say, all evil karma ever committed by me since of old. And people just cringe. They say, oh my God, that is so bad. I thought this was supposed to be about compassion. This sounds like religion. This sounds like original sin. We don't have that metaphysic in Buddhism. We don't talk about original sin. But it's interesting. We talk about original enlightenment. Now, they're two different metaphysics, but maybe they lead to the same kind of outcome. Could we consider the possibility that they do? Now, original sin, as I understand it, I'm not a Christian, I'm not a Catholic or a Protestant, but I understand that that's the notion that we're all marked before we even begin. We're already judged, and we've sinned, and it carries with it a lot of judgment and harshness, which I think many of us would rightfully say is not helpful. And that's often what we associate with religion. But it also has the outcome in many mystical and religious traditions of humility, people being humble and self-effacing, and simply people of faith and good-heartedness. So our metaphysic is different. Its original enlightenment is that we are all intrinsically awake. But what does it mean to wake up? If we're going to take this seriously, that our practice is about living an enlightened life, what does that really mean to wake up? This isn't just a philosophical teaching. So we start out with contrition, the whole thing. All karma ever committed by me since of old. How old is it? Pretty old. Starts to sound like original sin. Due to my beginningless greed, anger, hatred, and delusion. Beginningless. When does it end? After I recite the precepts? If this is just a self-improvement project, then, and I'm being really honest, a lot of the things that I want to improve will have some self-serving motive involved in them. I can't avoid it if I'm being honest. I don't want to be angry, rocks the boat. I don't want to, I hate conflict, so I'm gonna be a peaceful person. That's what Buddhism is supposed to be about, right? We should be peaceful. So then but there's something self-serving in that. And how do we avoid ourselves being self-serving in some way? How are we going to keep all these precepts for one day? I think it's much more useful to think about how we're going to break them all in one day. We're humans. We create karma. We're involved in life. It's how can we avoid karma? Well, you can have some idea that enlightenment is about being perfect in some way, and you're not going to create karma. I haven't arrived there yet. I'll let you know if it actually happens. But ask my wife if I'm perfect. My gosh, what a strange idea. But you see, it gets subtle. So here, in the 8th precept here, says, I will use all the ingredients of my life. This is the practice not being stingy. I will not foster a mind of poverty in myself or others. This is not original sin, is it? No, it's not. It's a different metaphysics. How do we foster poverty in our lives when we're depressed? Don't we feel like a victim? Has anyone here not felt like a victim in your life at one time or another? Isn't that an impoverishment to feel like you're a victim, to identify as a victim? Isn't it? So there's the triad that's totally disempowering. You can be a victim, you can be the perpetrator, or you can be the savior. And all three are disempowering. All three are a kind of impoverishment. And don't we do this all the time? So if we were to accept the possibility that we have received a religious tradition which is deeply transformative, whose purpose is to wake up, and we were to deeply consider what does it mean to wake up. Then I think we'd have to see that we're falling short of the mark much of the time, because it's hard to get out of the way. And the teachings in our tradition that I've been reading the Genjo Koan, because I'm going to talk to the reading group about it. And reading Dogen Zenji, he was a 13th century medieval monastic, and he is a deeply, deeply religious person. And the Genjo Koan is a deeply, deeply religious text. And every time I read this beautiful writing of Dogen's, I am reminded of the depth of this Zen tradition. And the depth is, it is religious. It's religious in the sense that we have to get out of the way. And then, it's not about having insights or about knowing more, it's about knowing less. It's not about adding anything more, it's about taking something away. It's not about insight, it's about stopping. We have this first barrier koan in the Zen tradition of Mu. And if you've had I'll say the good fortune or the misfortune of working on this koan, you know that it's like hitting a brick wall. And that can be very fruitful. Our culture is all about, when we talk about conversion, it's about seeing the light. But I think it's more about seeing the darkness, trusting what works in the darkness. And that has nothing to do with my will. It has nothing to do with what I believe in or what I think is right or what I think is wrong. It has to do with surrender, which is not a word we like to hear in our culture, or letting go, or being contrite, being humble, giving up contriving anything, being simple and humble and a person of faith. It seems to me this is what the tradition is pointing at. I'm going to say something here, and I don't want it to be misunderstood. I have to qualify it because it could be. I know there's a lot of suffering in our culture right now. There's a lot of trauma, and it's to be taken seriously. The suffering is serious, and we are doing a whole series of class on it now. Being well in a time of darkness, and we're trying to address things like trauma. or depression. So I want to first of all say that for those that experience trauma or depression, it is to be honored and acknowledged as a significant suffering, and the experience of that is real. But let's also challenge ourselves to think outside the box a little bit. Because I was teaching this class yesterday, and we were talking about depression, and I experienced depression early on in my life, way before there was a lot of medication for it. I didn't know there was anything wrong with me when I was depressed. So I thought it was just a spiritual condition, a kind of dark night of the soul. So if we weren't so quick to pathologize all the sufferings we have, and we approach them with some not knowing, and acknowledge that maybe this is part of a spiritual path I'm on, and that despair is not necessarily bad. When I look at samsara and the world of humanity that I am a part of, I could easily feel despair. Because if I'm being honest, there's really no escape from karma and suffering. And I'm going to create karma because I'm alive. And the idea that I could become enlightened in such a way that I wouldn't any longer participate in karma, it's just not, it's not realistic. I want to read you a little section from maybe my favorite poem by Rilke. It's called The Man Watching. I'm just going to read a section of it, because I think the way he's talking about despair here is really just, anyway, I'm just going to read it. What we choose to fight is so tiny. With what fights with us is so great. If only we would let ourselves be dominated as things do by some immense storm, we would become strong too and not need names. When we win, it's with small things, and the triumph makes us small. What is extraordinary and eternal does not want to be bent by us. You know, the root word for contrition, I believe in Latin, is crushed. To be contrite is to be crushed. That really sounds like trauma to me. But is there another possibility? Could there be wisdom in trauma? Could there be wisdom in depression? Could there be wisdom in suffering? So, you know, the favorite image in Taoism is water, because it always seeks the lowest place. Always goes to the very lowest place. That's where water goes. And that's a metaphor in Taoism for how we could be. We could be on the yin side of things instead of the yang. We always want the light, we want the yang. We want answers. We want to know things. We want insight. It's none of our business. So I would like to invite you just to consider that part of our practice here is deeply, deeply religious without all the baggage that comes with that. Is it possible? And I often use the word spiritual instead because that seems to be more accessible to people. When you use the word religion, it's like, ah! all the baggage comes up. But I would also ask you to consider what is going to carry on this tradition. Who's going to do it? Where is the what kind of aspiration is needed to carry on this Zen Center, this Sangha, this practice, these teachings, if it is not a spiritual one? Yeah, there's room for improvement. We can all work on ourselves. We don't want to just do anything and hurt people. But we are going to hurt people. And we are going to break the precepts. And I invite you to open your heart today and look at your life in terms of these precepts you've just taken a vow to keep, and see how you keep them and how you break them. And then at the end of the day, dedicate the merits of this day of your practice to everyone, to the world, to all sentient beings. And maybe it's not, so important that we be self-determined and we have agency and we know something. Maybe just having simple faith in something like the Dharma is enough. So I'll leave it at that, and we could have some discussion.
Those online, feel free to just unmute yourself. I have a microphone here for those in the room.
Roshi, could you say something more about the merit?
About what?
Merit. Dedicating the merit.
Yeah, you dedicate the merit, to any merit that you generate from doing this practice, you give it away to others to help them. You're not doing this practice to gain merit for yourself. You whatever virtue arises from your sincerity and genuineness, your straightforwardness, you give it away. Does that answer your question, Patrick? Yeah.
Thank you very much, Robert. There's obviously some similarity between what you were talking about today and what you were talking about dancing in the apocalypse. And certainly having to do with acceptance and bearing witness. And after that last talk that you gave, I was saying how it's very difficult for me to balance bearing witness and not becoming totally paralyzed emotionally and in terms of action.
Yeah.
And you said to me, that's why we sit. He said, you need to sit. And I'm hoping you could elaborate on that, how sitting is going to help,
Not be paralyzed.
well, not be paralyzed or bear witness or somehow find a way to integrate and with a balance, what it is that the way in which you are suggesting we choose to live.
Yeah, so the 3 tenets are just wonderful teaching. We start with not knowing. We have fixed ideas. We have fixed ideas about religion, for that matter, right? Lots of fixed ideas. So I think one of the things that sitting helps us do is to be in that yin place of not doing. And there's something very helpful about relaxing into that and realizing that, and I was saying in the class the other day, we have to start with all the mechanics of practice, posture and breathing, and you count your breath and all that. And then at some point, as you reach an inflection point, where it starts to dawn on you, this is actually a spiritual path and not just a self-improvement project. You start to relax into the whole thing, and you realize that sitting isn't a method, it's not a technique, it's a way of being with yourself, and you're just being still. And some of the time you're still, some of the time you're not, some of the time your mind is busy, but you have an intention to be with yourself in this way without distraction. And there's something about this courage to be in solitude and silence with ourselves that builds a kind of resilience for being, first of all, we're bearing witness to whatever we've disowned, and we've all disowned chunks of our own authenticity growing up. So part of what we're doing is trying to retrieve what I've pushed away, what's unconscious, and it includes my feelings. So I might be scared of anger. So bearing witness is actually owning my anger and not just being nice, right? Being willing to be in conflict with people when it's necessary, or make good trouble or something. So, but first of all, I'm practicing the not knowing so that I can just show up without getting stuck with any particular point of view, which then allows me to move into bearing witness, which is, I'm not bearing witness because I'm attached to an outcome that I'm going to achieve. That gets in the way. Bearing witness is, can I just be with the joy and the sorrow on the same level as where it is, in me, in you, in the community? And I'm not fixing anything. If I'm fixing something, I'm going to get discouraged really quickly because it's not fixable. Samsara is not fixable. We only have enlightenment because there's samsara. You can't have one without the other. You can't have enlightenment without delusion. Delusion is enlightenment. Well, except that doesn't mean just do anything you want. But the point here, I think, is that there is a kind of resilience that comes from sitting with yourself, a kind of backbone. You kind of have a strong back and a soft front, and that you're able to open your heart and feel the despair, actually have the despair, and not be crippled by it, not be taken down by it. Actually, because this is our humanity. So why would despair be a bad thing? Maybe it's a beautiful opportunity to move into the darkness and not know and be blind and trust something that we don't know and discover another way to be in the world in which we're not in charge and we're not responsible for being perfect or fixing it all. So then the despair can, if you're disheartened and taken down, I think that's a kind of what we would call idiot compassion. And I think like the grace process that we teach here, it's really important that we have this ability to attune to ourselves and attune to the other. So when we say the oneness of life, it's easy to misunderstand that as meaning, oh, everything's one. That's not, yes, but in terms of working with people, you have to differentiate. It's healthy to see the other as not myself, to see you. Beautiful to see you. And you're not me, and yet you are. We're both. We're both the same and we're different. So in that commitment of honoring Dharma as diversity, we see the other and honor it. And that's healthy. And I think when you can have these, this mind sight or the sense of our we-ness and our separateness at the same time, it makes compassion is really something that arises in that interaction, and it makes it possible that compassion will arise. And compassion is strong. It's not a weak thing. Compassion is resilient, and then we can be with suffering and not be taken down by it. And I think the reason why Joan Roshi developed Grace was to help people working in the health profession, because there's a lot of burnout there. And we can have experienced, I'm sure, in the last 2 or 3 years, periods of being really taken down by the world around us. It is disheartening. So you have to take care of yourself. Turn the news off. Listen to Mozart, or listen to some beautiful music that you like, or go play. I think it's possible.
Any other questions, comments online or in the room, here in the room?
Yeah, I was wondering, over the last couple of days, I've been having like a lot of like strong emotions and kind of the story behind it. And any tips for kind of how to approach that? How do we be with this suffering? Whether that's in the context of sitting or otherwise.
Well, I think it's really important to have your emotions and not stuff them. So there's this misconception that somehow, even when we take the precept of not being angry, we say don't indulge in anger, because it's really important to have anger when it comes up. It is not healthy to stuff that stuff. So if you're angry, you got to know that you're angry first in order to not act it out. You have to be conscious that you have it. But I think what you're doing in meditation, when any emotion arises, and there's always a story that goes with it, but the emotion arises first in the body, it doesn't, and then the head translates it as a story. So the being embodied is a way to have the direct emotion without the story. That's not so easy to do, but that's another reason why we sit, is that the anger is coming up. It's coming up in my body, and then I get it up. It comes first in the body, it doesn't come in my head. Then my head gets it and translates it into a story. And I can easily get into a fixed ideas with the story, and that can strengthen and rigidify the anger. So what I'm doing in meditation is I'm noticing I have the story, but I'm not completing it. In other words, if I'm practicing shamatha and I'm counting the breath, I'm trying to get to 10. I'm not getting to 10 because the story is I'm going off, But I now have set a container and an intention to be with myself in this way, so that I notice when the story is happening, I've lost the count, and a hand comes down and I stop the story in midstream. It's not what we want to do. I'm enjoying my soap opera. I like my soap opera. It's pretty entertaining. It's kind of seductive. I get carried away. I like to tell the story several times and add a little spin at the end. You know, that's juicy. But no, practice is a real disappointment because it's saying, no, don't do that. Come back to the breath. Well, that's boring. Okay, good, be bored. But when I do that, I'm not repressing the emotion. I'm just letting go of the story that goes with it. So when I have that emotion in the body, that can be a wisdom. I can do a lot of things with that anger wisdom. I could go out and elect someone to a political office. I could go out and demonstrate or advocate for something in the world. I could clean my house in half the time with that could be a wisdom. So when the emotion is embodied without a story that keeps interpreting it, that emotion, which could be very toxic, could actually function as a wisdom. It could cut through bullshit. Think of Bob Dylan. Don't think he was angry? Oh my God. We need that kind of anger. That's a wisdom. Cuts through bullshit. We need poets. We need artists. We need people that make good trouble. You can't make good trouble without some anger. Come on. Oh yeah, I'm gonna be peaceful and stop climate catastrophe. Yeah, it's not gonna work. But if you get carried away, if you get caught, you could easily get stuck in the emotion, can't we? You can easily end up with a fixed view about it and easily feel that I'm a victim now. Someone's doing it to me. That's the beauty of this practice, is that you're coming back to not knowing, which is really dropping the story, and then bearing witness is opening to what's here. And what's here may be an embodied emotion that's very strong in you. And what's the matter with that? Yeah, did that answer your question a little bit? The whole idea is that we can transmute what's negative by practicing with it, by being, we did a feeding your demon practice last week in a class. By feeding your demon, you're instead of struggling with it, instead of making it into an enemy that's something you have to fight or defeat, you feed it. You get to know it. You give it what it wants. That's a very different approach to illness. And it's a very Buddhist way of thinking about the world and ourselves. Is that what we're fighting with is we disown it. We get disconnected from it. When we fight it, it gets separated from our psyche. But when you feed it, it's part of you. And that's helpful.
So
Yeah.
So the three jewels
Yeah.
are ways of, as I've been studying some of the things from Thich Nhat Hanh, these are refuges where when we are having trouble and suffering, that we can go to them to help ourselves, the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. And I have had despair at times, especially during the reign of our former president.
Yeah.
And I had trouble getting out of that, and I had to really have some faith in the practice of, like you said, the three tenets are looking or not knowing, and then not knowing and bearing witness and taking action, and so that is a way for me, and Thich Nhat Hanh has also said that having despair is one of the worst things you can do, because it takes away your faith in these refuges, in yourself, in your dharma, in your practice. And if you start giving that up, it's just like a spiral down, wouldn't it be?
No, I understand. Despair can be, you have chronic despair and chronic depression where you can't function, but I'm suggesting another possibility. I'm not saying, again, I keep qualifying this.
Okay.
Despair and disheartening is often not useful, and but could we just consider the possibility?
I'm sorry. I'm ignoring the chronic condition of the medical condition of despair. I didn't.
No, I get what you're saying.
Yeah.
I had the same despair that you had, I think.
Yeah.
I think probably we all had the same despair, but I think we also have to give ourselves permission to have despair and not judge ourselves too harshly, saying, oh, I shouldn't be in this dark place because I should be in the light, but maybe it's a dark place that we're in. So what's the matter with that? Why couldn't that be a fruitful condition instead of just a negative one? Why couldn't being depressed actually be a spiritual dark night of the soul where we're digesting something that we need to take time to digest, and we need to be in the darkness, but we don't trust the darkness at all. We want to be in the light, but the yin side of things is where we don't have agency, where we're vulnerable and receptive, and we don't really trust that very much in our culture. And I'm sort of suggesting that we could, by taking refuge in Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, we're trusting that which is outside our ability to control or contrive or change. It's a not doing. Could we trust? The Dharma doesn't care about what I think is right or wrong. That's why it's the Dharma. That's why it's pure and spiritual, because I can't mess with it. And when I'm the central image that Dogen uses in the Genjo Koan is just brilliant, of the mirror. So when the dark side makes the mirror reflect the dark, then you can see the Dharma. When you're dark, when you are without self, then you can see. Then taking refuge in the Dharma is taking refuge in getting out of the way so I can see what is actually here, and it's spiritual and magnificent and beautiful, and there's also despair. When we did the Bearing Witness retreat in South Dakota last summer, June Roshi and me, there was so much beauty in the indigenous culture and so much ugliness, all mixed together. And Bearing Witness is like that. You can't just pull out one thing and say, I want to have the happiness or I want to have the joy. They all come together. And to the degree that we can allow ourselves the courage to have the despair and have the darkness, we can also have the light. Things like that. So.
It seems to me that not knowing requires a lot of knowing.
Well, it's not a blank consciousness.
Right. So in terms of the kind of consciousness awareness.
It's a discern. It doesn't mean you don't discern. There could be insight, but you don't get fixated on a particular point of view necessarily.
Yeah, maybe that's what I was trying to understand, the concept of not knowing, and then I'm hearing a lot of awareness that goes into not knowing.
Well, awareness is kind of like not knowing, because awareness is, we all have a capacity to be self-aware, but it doesn't mean we're self-centered. To be self-aware means we have an awareness of the content of our consciousness, our thoughts, our feelings, and mindfulness is kind of cultivating that awareness that's free of the content of our consciousness. And to the degree that we trust that awareness, then we can be reflective about ourselves. We can not identify 100% with our thoughts or our emotions. And I think that's a kind of not knowing. Whereas if we're just in the content of our consciousness and I am my thought, now that's not knowing. I'm actually contriving all kinds of stuff. And the not knowing means I have to stop doing that and trust that there is a capacity in me as a human being to be aware, and that awareness is really unconditional, but the rest of everything is conditioned, it's karmic. There's causes and conditions, but that awareness is dharmic in the sense that it's pure, but it's not me as such either.
Thanks.
The me that I identify with, me, I, and myself.
Any other comments, questions, thoughts for those of you online? I think we're about at time here, so I'd like to give any of the Zoomers a chance to give a comment, question, thought.
Thanks for the talk, Robert.
Thank you. Please support the Sangha. Please support the Dharma and the Buddha, and do this practice today, and then dedicate the merit and see what you discover when you try to keep these precepts for one day. Good luck. That's what my teacher told me. He said, good luck.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
Please join us in the community room for some snacks and coffee and tea.